Good morning. We'll continue with our discussion about the avoda, this unique avoda on Yom Kippur of the Ketores. And if you're following inside the text, we're on page Hey, and we're up to Halachas HaKetores. Now it's interesting because just like we have in Zevach, we have four avodas, one of which is halacha, and if the Kohen at the moment of halacha would have a machshava of pigul, that would passel the carbon and engender a shame pigul. So too, with regard to the ketores, the halacha, taking the ketores from the azara into the Kodesh Kodshim, would likewise incur a psul of pigul, because halacha is the avoda that parallels halachas adam in zrika in the case of a ketores. But here he has a discussion. He takes, if you recall, the chafina and places it in the kaf. And now he runs over to the machta, the first machta, which is on the floor, the Robert Arvi of the Azara. And he carries both the machta with the gecholim and the kaf with the ketores into the Kodesh Kodesh. Now, if I were to ask you intuitively, which hand, meaning the right hand, which hand should be matched up with which? With the gecholim on the one hand or with the ketores on the other hand?
I would say the right. I would say the right hand.
No. I'm asking. The right hand is the more chashuv hand. Now I'm asking you to do a matching. I'm giving you two choices. He needs one hand for the ketores, which is in the kaf, and another hand for the gecholim, which is in the machta. When he gets to his right hand, which of the two should he be carrying with his right hand intuitively?
It seems like the ketores.
Yeah, for sure. It should be the ketores, because the ketores is the chefza of the avoda here. That's the carbon that he's bringing. The haktor is on the ketores, it's not on the gecholim. The gecholim is just a chetimta. So I have news for you. I mean, for me too. The law is that no telas hamachta im hagecholim biyad yimid, ves hakaf im haketores biyad small. It's exact opposite. He says, min adin, I'm reading to you the footnote, holachas haketores teyasa biyamin. It would make more sense that the kaf holding the ketores should be on his right hand. Holachas hagecholim teyasa bit small. So now we get into a health issue, an issue about protecting the good health, so to speak, the well-being of the Kohen Gadol. He says, "Berov hashanim hoisa machtas hagecholim kveda." Ask yourself the question: which is heavier, if you put them on a scale, the gecholim, the machta with the gecholim, or the kaf with ketores? I mean, ketores is almost it's lightweight, right? Because it's only samamonin. V'chein hoisa machta chama. Ask yourself which of the two is hot. It's going to be the machta. The machta is hot because it's got gecholim in it, hot coals. I mean, he's going to do the haktorah of the ketores with those hot coals. Hakaf tonenes. Lefichach nitzreches hamachta liyad yamin hachazaka. He's going to be facing a couple of challenges here. Number one, a heavy machta. Number two, a hot machta. He's more proficient with his right hand than his left hand. He will take the machta in his right hand. And that's the Gemara here in Yuma Daf Mem Zayin. B'achrona birsha hutrakan avodas halacha b'smol. In effect, he's doing halacha of the ketores, which is like the dam in Kodshim, with his left hand. In Kodshim, that would passel the karma. If, let's say, the dam was received in a mizrach and carried to the mizbeach by the Kohen in a halacha small, yad small, it would be possible. And here, there's a special leniency to allow carrying the Ketores with his left hand. This is a very new principle that we've never really addressed in Kodshim. Which means that when we talk about small and it's a psul, we're talking about the fact that he could have done it with his right hand. Why did he do it with his left hand? He's got a mizrach dominant. He has to be molechit to the mizbeach for zrika. And now he's carrying in his left hand? That's a psul. But if there's a very, very good reason why he's using his left hand instead of his right hand to make the avoda feasible, then the left hand is like a right hand. His right hand is preoccupied. He's got to carry the machta with heavy gecholim, which is hot, with his right hand. His right hand is not available. He's using the left hand for holachas haktores, kaf, only because he doesn't have another option. In such a case, small is not small. Now, this leads me to a conclusion which is very, very questionable and has to be investigated. It's not for me to do this now, but what do you say about a lefty? Does the halacha change to the lefty? And that's not a question I want to raise as far as Ketores. I want to raise that question as far as Dam Zvachim is concerned. What happens in the case of a lefty and the Kohen is proficient with his left hand and he does the avodah with his left hand and he's molech the dam with it? The answer probably is, okay, he could have used his right hand. He's a lefty, but you can carry a mizrach in your right hand. Very often you and I have situations where we have to carry two things. So we carry this in the right and this in the left. And it's possible and feasible to carry in the left. I mean, I should have said it the other way around. It's feasible to carry it in his right hand, which is like our left hand in the case of the lefty of a south. But in the case of Ketores, this is already absolute. This is already standard for every Kohen Gadol. And that's the way we want to do it. We want to do it in a way that facilitates the ability to do this avoda, in this case, this holacha, in the right way. And therefore, even a righty will give up his right hand, so to speak, for the machta and the gecholim, and then he's left with the kaf and the ketores in his left hand. Okay. Now comes the exciting part. After halacha, what happens now? So you and I might say, you've got it, he's in the Kodesh Kodshim. This doesn't happen too often, once a year. And only the Kohen Gadol. Let him take the kaf with the ketores in his left hand, put it into the machta with the gecholim in his right hand, and fartik an asek, and then the pillar of smoke goes up. But that's not what happens. He's got to place the kaf and the machta on the ground before he does the Torah. And in fact, after he places the kaf on the ground, he's going to need another chafina. Chafina round two. We spoke yesterday about two machtos. It was machta number one and machta number two. First machta with the gecholim, and second machta with the ketores. Now we're saying there's another chafina. He did the first chafina from machta number two, gathered together that ketores, put it into molech into the kaf. Now he's putting the kaf down on the ground of the Kodesh Kodshim. He's going to bend down and do another chafin. But we're going to see how enormously complicated this is. It's almost humanly impossible to do the chafina the way the halacha requires. But now getting back to my main question. Where in the Kodesh Kodshim? Everything has to be pinpointed exactly where. And there's an area called Bein Habad, which means the Aron with the Luchos Eidos is in the Kodesh Kodshim. and one could ostensibly argue that that is the essence of the Kodesh Kodshim. Right, the Shechina would come down between the Kruvim that were on top of the Aron, and then there were two Badim, which we'll call poles for a lack of a better word. They had to be stationary and permanently attached to the two sides of the Aron. And he would place, the Kohen Gadol would place the kaf and the machta on the ground between these two badim. Shemagia la'aron, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, no seinas ha'machta la'ritzpa, ein shnei badei ha'aron. Now here, we have a very fascinating question. Bishlema, I understand how that could be accomplished in Bayis Rishon, because the Aron was present in the Kodesh Kodshim in Bayis Rishon. But what are we going to do with Bayis Sheni? Bayis Sheni, the Aron was Bigniza, right? Raiders of the Lost Ark. We don't know where the Ark is. So there's an unbelievable chiddush here in the Gemara itself, in two places. It's here in Yoma, it's also in Menachos, that the Bein Abadim, let's go back to the first Mikdash, was situated, the Bein Abadim, between the Badim, on top of the Evan Shasiyah. Now, I've never been up on the Har. I don't know if anyone here has been there. Don't tell me if you are. I'd rather not know about it. But they say that you can see the Evan Shasiyah even today. So I hope, Dan, you're not planning any tiyulim to the Har Bayis. So you'll show them where the Evan Shasiyah is. Don, I meant to say Don. In any event, getting back to the Bayis Sheni, the halacha is not that the macht has to be placed down ben abadim. The halacha requires that the macht to be placed in the makom of ben abadim, which in the first Mikdash is literally ben abadim, and the second is in the location, the exact pinpoint where the Evan Shasiyah is. And even in Bayis Sheni, they knew exactly where the Evan Shasiyah was. And that's where he would place the macht. Now, in the footnote here, number 30 days, he quotes the Kiryas Sefer, and the same chiddush you'll find in the Brisker Rav, that Makar l'Makam Aktar ben Abadim is, why did they have to do the Aktara dafka ben Abadim? So I don't have access to neither the Kiryas Sefer nor to the Kuntris on Masechta Yoma of the Brisker Rav. If anybody has access to any of those two Sfarim, I'd be curious to know how the Chazal derived the conclusion that the makom for the Aktara of the Ktoris would be Dafka Ben Abadim in the Kodesh Kadosh. Okay, now we're up to the second chafina. Chafina number 2. Li'achar shenosan esamachta ben shnei abadim, oyechofen shuv es haktores mitoch hakaf shebesoch yoda. This makes no sense. How is it possible to hold the kaf that has the Ktoris in it and do a chafina with 2 hands? I've never met anyone that has 3 hands. Maybe there is such a being on the face of the earth, but certainly your average Kohen Gadol had only 2 hands. Would you agree with me? How can you possibly be holding the kaf and do a chafina with 2 hands? He says, "Hoisa chafina zu havodos hakoshos shebemigdash." All right, that's a chatzi nechama. You're telling me that this second chafina was up there on the top of the charts of the most complicated and most difficult avodos that were done in the Mikdash. Okay, that's a half a consolation, but how did he do it? He says that Shitas HaTosfos, now we're turning to Daf Vav, to page Vav, Shechovas Chafina Ashniya Eina Ela Midrabbanan. The whole enterprise of the second Chafina is all rabbinic. Other Rishonim will see hold its Doraisa, and the Mikdash David, who I told you is like the super commentary on Kodshim and on Taurus as well, he claims that even Tosfos agrees that the second Chafina is Doraisa, but rather Tzorch min haTorah litenes haktores ala machta biyadav velo bekli el shlo tzorech lasos Chafina nosefes. The Ketores has to get into the machta with the hands of the Kohen Gadol and not with a kli. That's what the Torah requires. So the idea of what we call a second chafina, that's the Rabban. On a Doraisa level, he doesn't have to do a chafina. The Torah just requires that you don't use the kli, meaning the kaf, to pour the ketores onto the machta, onto the gechol. The kli is disqualified. It's got to be a daim shel kohen. Does it have to be chafina? Tosfos holds it doesn't have to be through a chafina. He can pour, pick up the ketores with one hand and pour it onto the macht of the gecholim. He doesn't have to do a chafina with two daim. That was a rabbinic requirement. All right, it still doesn't solve our problem. How is it possible for him to do such a thing? Shitas Tosfos Harosh, Shechavina Zu Min HaTorah. The Torah requires chafina, the second chafina. Lefisha beikar adin haya lahavias haktores lekodesh kadoshim bechafnov below kli. Initially, the Torah was making, but the original ideal vision of the Torah was that the chafnayim molei chafnov from the second machta should be brought directly into the Kodesh Kadoshim as such, not through a kaf. But that was impossible. Again, if you take the Torah literally, it says Umalo chafnav Torah samim daka hevi mibayis leparochas. He brings it into the Kodesh Kadoshim. So we're going to dash Umalo chafnav vehevi sheyavi b'Umalo chafnav. The pasuk seems to indicate that he has to take the Umalo chafnav and bring the Ketores in his hands into the Kodesh Kadoshim, not with a kli, not with a kaf. El she'efshar shelo yitel kli bali chasa. It's impossible to do halacha without a kli. He's also carrying in the Kodesh, the machta with the gecholim. Ulam baktaras haktaras efshar shelo bekli. In the case of the Aktorah, it's possible even without a kli. It's therefore shuv nitzchayv lahaktim lo chafta. So as far as the halach is concerned, that was impossible. But as far as the actual, it was impossible to go directly from a lo chafnav and carry it into the Kodesh Kadoshim. He's got to carry also the gecholim. But once he gets to the point of pouring or placing the Torah onto the gecholim, at that point he can do it with a malo chafna. So now we're going to go back to the pasuk, and the pasuk says malo chafna vehevi, and we're going to interpret it as vehevi malo chafna onto the gecholim for the purpose of the Torah. So that's what we have here. A machlokes between Tosas and Tosa Rush as to whether the second Malol Chafnov is Doraisa. And it all depends how you interpret the pasuk of a heavy Malol Chafnov. The Tosa Rush interprets the heavy Malol Chafnov is only referring to the transportation of the. I'm sorry. Tosas understands that it's only referring to the transportation of the Ketores into the Kodesh Kodashim. But as far as the actual Haktorah, there's no requirement of Malol Chafnov. And the Tosa Rush interprets that the pasuk Vehevi Malol Chafnov refers specifically to what goes on in the Kodesh Kodashim. And that requires a separate and a second Malol Chafnov to transport, to transfer the Ketores into the Machta of Gechon for purposes of HaKtorah. Now, I'm looking for something which I saw, and unfortunately, I'm not finding it here. Second. Oh. He now quotes Shitas Rashi, and with this we'll complete our discussion for today. Rashi says that Ofen Chafina Zu Nasta al Yidei Shaya Oches Es Yad Hakaf Birosh Etzba'osa. So the kaf, the spoon has a handle, and he somehow grabs onto the handle with, I guess, his two larger middle fingers. He calls it Rosh Etzbosov. O Bishinov. Wow. He's holding on to the kaf, which is Malay Torres, in his mouth, biting with his teeth. Moshech es yada. Now, either with his two fingers, or with his mouth, he now pulls the kaf l'kivun gufo, closer to his body. Ad shegiya hayad levein shnei marpekov. V'akaf atzma nimteis berosh shtei kapos yadav. Ha'ochzim ze b'zeh. Umates hakaf l'tzidah ma'at ma'at ad shememali es kol chafnov b'ktoris. Again, I don't have all the nitty-gritty details. We'll go over this again tomorrow. But basically what he's able to do is he's able to bring the kaf with the ketoris closer to his body such that now he can dig in his hands and lift up the ketoris, and then he's going to be makdir it inside the mach. Okay, so b'li neder, that's where we'll pick it up tomorrow.